One of the most frustrating things about crazy people is that crazy people usually think sane people are crazy. So if you happen to be sane for the most part, you not only have to deal with being surrounded by crazy people, but you also have to deal with those crazy people calling you crazy. So it's insult added to injury. And one example of this craziness that I'm speaking of is this belief that supporting an institution based on a practice which everyone considers unethical when so called ordinary people partake in this practice, they think, well, these other people, when they do it, it's not actually unethical. It's actually the means of establishing a utopia on Earth. Like, that's actually delusional. You're believing that something that is clearly unethical for you or I to do, when someone else does it who has just a title added to their name, that because they have that title or that position or that employment, somehow that unethical behavior is not only no longer unethical, but it's the fast track to social justice and making the world a better place. Like, that is insane thinking. But that's actually how most people think. And in fairness to them, they were indoctrinated to think that way. They were indoctrinated to believe that actions that are obviously unethical for so called ordinary people to do, they were indoctrinated to believe, well, it's not really the same thing when the so-called authorities do it. It's actually something different when they do it. And again, not only is it different and okay, it's more than okay. So like you couldn't be more wrong. And not only are they calling evil good, but they're saying, "Oh, this evil is actually the greatest good. This is actually where we should put all of our efforts. We should put all of our focus and devote so much of our time and energy to supporting these people to carry out these unethical practices because it's actually that great. Even though, again, if you or I were to do this to each other, it would clearly be wrong and rightly called criminal. Like, that's how, if you're wondering why the world is so crazy, a lot of people will say, oh, the world is so crazy, but they don't really pinpoint the exact reason why it's so crazy. They don't pinpoint the craziness exactly like I'm doing here. So you might be, what is this unethical practice that you're talking about? What is this unethical behavior that if you or I were to do it, it would clearly be wrong, but we seem to have been tricked and bamboozled into thinking it's not okay, or excuse me, that it is okay when they do it. Well, it's this little thing called taxation, folks. The entire basis of the system, right? Like, that is what the system is fundamentally. That's what distinguishes it from other organizations and institutions. They carry out extortion, right? They coerce people to pay them money. They just take it straight from you without without asking, without permission, right out of your paycheck, right when you go to the cash register to purchase something, etc., etc., right? All the ways we're taxed. It's not like you have an option about it. It's automatic. And if you don't comply, you will face some negative consequence, hence the coercion. And this is what extortion is, like just look up the word extortion in the dictionary. That's what it is. It's coercing people to give you money. It's not anything complicated. So I was listening to a well-known speaker who is against socialism and for what he calls, free market capitalism. And um, he was making a good critique of socialism, and the reason why it was good was because he was just getting down to basic ethics, and he was saying, you know, it's not okay to steal. Just because you think it would be more fair to steal from people who have more and give it to people who have less doesn't actually mean that's ethical, and it doesn't actually mean that that's going to be the means to a utopia. So that's all fine and good, but the conservative statist capitalist critique of socialism is severely lacking in depth and comprehensiveness. And so, in fairness to the socialists, who are more wrong than the capitalists, but in fairness to them, they're recognizing, or they might complain about an inequality of wealth that is unfair. Now, the way that they talk about it might be completely inaccurate and unintelligent, and of course, based on this delusional idol worship of the state as the means to redistribute wealth in a fair and just manner, as if these are like the all-wise angels that should carry out such a procedure, which is completely delusional, just against all of history and current reality. But they are right that there actually is like a fundamental inequality in an economic sense that is unjust. But the problem is they don't pinpoint it correctly, and neither do capitalists or anybody else. So, socialists will talk about like healthcare as a human right, or housing as a human right, or, all these so called rights, which are just basically what they want government to provide through taxation, right? So they just basically want like more and more government services paid by more and more taxation, because they think that's the way to, create fairness. So there is some, I mean, like it's possible to understand that train of thought. It's not like it's completely batshit crazy. Like, there is some um, coherence, or whatever the right word is. Like, they're thinking, okay, people have these problems. So why don't we get the government to, you know, solve these problems, right? That's their basic train of thought. And of course, the main problem with that train of thought is that they think the government is like a good means to establish justice in the world, which it is not, because it's based on extortion, which is unethical and unjust. So they think an entire institution based on violence and this false superiority over everybody else, they think that that institution is the way to like make the world a better place, which is just really dumb and doesn't jive with ethical consistency or all of history, right? So not so minor details of why their hope is, misplaced, why their their idol is a false god that they're believing in. But the conservative capitalists are wrong, and in their sort of view is simplistic and wrong in another way, right? Like just like the socialists, their view is simplistic and wrong in the sense of like, oh, there are hungry people. Okay, well, we'll just get the government to feed the hungry people. Or, oh, there's people that need health care. Oh, we'll just get the get the government to provide health care. Simple as that. You know, again, neglecting the fact that government is inherently unethical, historically the most violent, and not the means to make the world a better place, right? Forgetting those minor details, not so minor. And but then likewise, you'll hear like the conservative capitalists say, "Oh well, you know, you gotta earn your wealth, and and whatever wealth you have, as long as it's legal, that's perfectly fine. And if anyone is, struggling in poverty, basically they just got to work harder, and for those that can't, for whatever reason, they got handicaps and whatnot, there is private charity kind of thing to help take care of that. So that view is overly simplistic and wrong because it doesn't recognize that there is actually an economic injustice that is normal, right? That is accepted as okay, but it is not okay. And I've talked about this many times before, but it seems like 99% of people don't listen anytime I say it. So I just keep saying it in hopes that, like, one day someone's like, oh, I kind of get what he's saying now. And the way I think is best to get this across is to give this imaginary scenario, right, of being on a seafaring ship that gets lost, and you end up on an uninhabited island, and you land on the island, and what do you do? Well, if there's fresh water on the island and some edible plants, the same thing that I think actually most people would do is they would share the water and the food that's available, evenly among themselves because that's needed for survival, right? And so it wouldn't be right to like let some people starve or, die of dehydration when there's enough on the island to share, right? I think like 99.9% of people would agree with that. So here's where your indoctrination and programming that makes you actually delusional comes in, is that you think that it's not the same fundamental situation all across the earth all the time. It is. Why do you think that these survival necessities, these natural resource survival necessities, why do you think it's okay for them not to be shared freely? There's no good answer. There's no good answer, and no one ever even talks about it. And I think because they don't want to even face the fact that they've just been going along with the fundamental injustice that is the foundation of most poverty and exploitation and oppression and misery on the planet, which is having to pay other people just to live on the planet, right? Having to be in a position where you are denied your birthright. And if you don't see how the basic natural resources of land, water, air, if you can't see why those should just be birthrights, you really need to think about that more. Like, why would you think that they're not birthrights? Why would they be birthrights in the scenario of the shipwreck, on the uninhabited island? Why is it that 99% of people recognize, oh, they're birthrights in that scenario, Oh, but if you're just born on the planet somewhere else, then it's not a birthright anymore. Now you gotta, you know, be in the rat race and be, you know, making mammon or wealth your god and having to, chase money all the time just to pay the rent, right? Because number one expense being just having a place to sleep at night, right? Like you're a human being on this planet Earth, but just to have a place to like sleep undisturbed, oh, you have to pay other humans for that. Like, why do you think that's okay? Like, really, it doesn't make any sense. It's just foolish. Do you think you have to pay other humans for air, to breathe air? If they started charging you for every breath you took, if some crazy like, technological dystopia where, you wear this monitor and it charges you for every breath you take, like would you think that's okay? Like I would I would expect your answer to be no. I think if I took a poll, like at least 99% probably people would say no. Like the government can't charge me for every breath I take. They didn't create the air. The air is just part of nature and we need it to survive. Well, yeah, you're right. And same goes for water, dumbass. Like what the fuck? Like why do you get that about air, but you don't get it about land and water? Like where's the disconnect? Those are also needed for survival, right? Like you need a piece of land to grow the food and to have a place to sleep at night. Like you need water to drink. Like why do you not get that those are survival birthrights? Sorry for speaking harshly, but it's just incredible that zero people, as far as I know of, are aware of this or talking about this. And if they hear me talk about it, they think it's kind of like some fringe philosophy. Like they don't at all recognize that this is like the fundamental injustice that makes the world such a crappy place to live in, because everyone is put in a position of dependency and poverty and forced to fund the institutions that are messing up the world the most and that just keep playing people over and over as dupes, you know, proposing one false solution after another, which just gives them more power. And people think that's like, again, going to actually make the world a better place. The greatest insanity to, like, once you get anarchism, once you get like having no rulers and that the institution of government is just completely unethical and a tragic, you know, it's just one tragedy after another, one injustice after another, and then it's just this false god and based on false morality and based on, unethical behavior. Like once you get that, the craziest thing to hear, and again, this goes back to what I was saying originally about like people that actually wake up and become sane, not only have to deal with most people around them being crazy, but those crazy people then call them crazy. And they say, oh, you're crazy for thinking that we could live without this institution of violence that is historically, the most uh, revoltingly uh, violent themselves, right? Like, you're crazy for not thinking that we can live without them. Like, really? Like, we could have nuclear annihilation tomorrow, right? One government doing, doing so to the other. And we can just look at all the tragedies and, wars and etc. done by governments throughout history. And you really think that is a better alternative than just people living freely, like having a little bit of land for their family, some water or a vegetable garden. Like that's more dangerous. Like like I can't even begin to articulate how insane that is. People actually believe that like communities of people who are respected as individuals, right? Who aren't committing extortion against each other and have a little bit of land and water and seed, of course, air as their free birthrights. Like, you actually think that's worse than the system of government that has been committing all these atrocities and continues to just roll out one destructive scenario after another? Like, you think people without unnatural power to commit violence against everybody and it be called ethical, like, you think that's worse? It's it's worse for people to have like fruit orchards and vegetable gardens and, be left alone. Like, that's a greater danger than these institutions, which have, historically and currently been the most violent and, deceptive, and just carry out an unethical practice known as extortion every day, to billions of people, all the time. Like that, it's just that's how I hesitate to use the word retarded because I know it's kind of like a taboo word, but it's, yeah, it's like very, very, very stupid, right? That's what I mean by the word. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And but yeah, if you think, that living in some communist shithole is like the way to go, well, go ahead. But you know, give North Korea a whirl, like, see how you like that. And as the United States becomes more and more communist and they just keep taking away people's rights and freedoms, and people go along with it because they trust in this deceptive false god, and they just want everyone else to go with the program and try and shame you into being obedient to this, obvious shithole or shit train, headed towards, a ditch, as it just always does. Give these people more power, they just use it to be more and more abusive, and the world just gets shittier and shittier. Like, I don't see how you don't notice that. But yeah, if you're all about it, then you know, just set up your own little masochist, tribe. Set up a few people to be your sadistic rulers, and then you can all be your, mask wearing masochists that just get injected with whatever the rulers want, and of course they disarm you and just micromanage your lives, down to the, you know, down to the everyday little details, like what you can teach your children, and etc. What you can drive, and just everything. Just have them micromanage your life down to the last detail, and then you can bliss out on your masochist dystopia. Um, but for those of us that aren't interested, you should really just back off and just leave us alone, and you can have your little twisted fantasy world. But yeah, don't expect anyone else to go along with it, and don't think you're like a social justice warrior for pushing it on others. So, in conclusion, everyone is wrong. Socialists are more wrong, but even people that identify as like conservative or anti-socialist, they're wrong too. They also don't get what the root injustice is. They also, uh, for the most part, uh, support states to one degree or another. The closest, label that even comes close to like what actually the sane perspective is, you could call anarcho-capitalism, or veganarchism, which is just recognizing that we should not only apply the non-aggression principle towards humans, which means no rulers, but also towards animals, which just means you leave them alone. Like, come on, people, really? Like, you think it's that big a deal just to leave animals alone and just get your nutrients from plants and fungi and minerals? Like, it's not hard at all, and you're just gonna be probably unpleasantly surprised when you find out that Genesis 1:29 really is what God wanted, and He's not okay with humans being abusive towards animals, and Jesus didn't actually eat fish. And well, if you just recognized the golden rule for what it is, just to treat others as you want to be treated, and didn't believe everything church authorities and government institutions teach you, if you had strong enough ethics, you wouldn't be listening to the bullshit fed to you by these institutions, and you'd look into things more, and you discover, oh, Jesus didn't actually eat fish, and he never did endorse governments, and it's all, basically garbage coming from this false apostle who was called out as a false apostle from the very start. But I, go on a slight tangent here just to point out that everyone is wrong for the most part because they just neglect basic ethics, and so that's the main problem. Distorted knowledge of good and evil leading to the fall of man. All right, thanks for listening.